them. Like, they're still around the room. There's images of different housing complexes around the world, and like it was all affordable housing designs from the exterior. So a lot of them were very inspired by that with their initial design, but we didn't focus on like what does it look like on the inside. Yeah. So that's why we got kids with man caves, which is cool, but also like that's when it stopped being as realistic. Yeah. And then I feel like that's be creative, but where time constraint came in for us, and even developing this constraints. Like our constraint, we knew we wanted to do that. Yeah. Came in with the cost of flooring, because we knew we only had a week and a half. Like that was, so we talked about time. Next year, I know this might be a 3-week project. Like it's gonna take time for them to have a budget, constraints, like design. You know, we gave them a packet in terms of square footage for each room, what's realistic. So everyone had a packet. They knew this is where like basically house codes, right, of what that would look like. But I still don't think we went as like specific in terms of what should affordable
and making
housing.
It that much more realistic and grounded.
Yeah. So that the timeline.
I'm wondering also
a big one.
Yeah. I'm wondering also then what the overlap of the math skills there are. Like, because obviously when you introduce constraints, you're talking, there's even possibilities of projects going into the negative, and like seeing that piece. There's also, I think there was a real opportunity for speaking about like volume as well as a like construct of space. Yeah. Which would have been interesting.
I mean, there's a lot of things to change. I actually, to be very transparent, like I love the energy the kids put into it. I was kind of, they were totally committed. But with the end product, like I was not satisfied, because like when we went to the actual like aerial view, kids were having a really big problem with scale. And because of that, we like, okay, just give us what the concept design looks like. But I think there was a big loopholes in terms of skill, in terms of like just creating quality work. Someone like Dahlia, this is hers. No, this is Diego Camacho's and Miguel. They were able to kind of think about scale and like, oh, how big should a tree be? I feel like we needed a day of like even just measuring things. Like, how high is a tree? Yeah. You know, like what does that actually look like?
I'm wondering also,
kids were all over the place.
That would have been the opportunity to even like bring in an architect.
Yes.
Bring in a designer, a contractor, so that they can actually build that kind of realism that you're talking about. Because there was like, there's some one random of the designs, and it's such a reality. And like I think back to like when I was doing architecture, like the one thing that like grounded me was actually having a figure, like a person, and putting them in the space and getting a sense of like, and that's the proportional relationship, right? Like, okay, if this person is 3 inches and they really are in the real world 6 feet, if this is like 10 of these people, that's like a lot. There's an issue there. But having them actually think in that smaller scale would be really helpful. That's cool.
So a lot of, because then you have this, right? Because aerial view in itself, I think spatially, some kids are like, what? Like, we had examples. Like there was Google there. We had like some kids understood aerial view. Like this kid did not understand aerial view. Yeah, so I have my examples of like for next year, right? Like is this aerial? Like would I see the side of Safeway from the top? Like
how did you explain that to the kids?
I mean, they already had that concept. I think most kids were able to do previous knowledge. Most kids had done that at some other point, but we still went over it, and we still had like examples, like real world examples, like what does this look like? They were there every day. They were actually there while people were working.
Did you practice it outside of the project itself? Like having them draw an aerial view of an ant versus an elephant versus a car?
No, we did not do that. Which now do that. I feel like now understanding it needs to be just a longer, and we need a scaffold. And I think the difficulty with that, and with always, is some kids get it, and some kids really don't. So
they get what? The math concept?
Like I could explain aerial view and they can go. Yeah. Whereas some kids really, like this kid really needed like a practice. And I feel like whenever...
Which is something that you do really well. Like you differentiate anyway. So
which is what I said. Maybe the project needs to be like that too. Like this is what it's going to look like. And usually I do that, but I feel like I need to be more intentional with that.
Why do you think you didn't do it for this one?
I just assumed, and that's you shouldn't assume that kids would understand. I assumed like there were so many components. I was like, I didn't think like, this one was the one that I had to really like.
Do you think time is also like?
It was the thing. Yeah. I mean, I think we wanted something with depth, and then we came up short of that. Yeah. And I think once we're in it, it's like, okay, we already got started with it. Let's just have them produce a product they're proud of. Mm-hmm. And like all kids produce something that they're really happy with. Yeah. Now, next year would be like, okay, then let's make it more...
Even more strategic.
More strategic.
I'm curious, so when before our actual like observation, we talked about like what you wanted me to focus on, and you mentioned like how you kind of set the expectations for students and how they kind of responded to that and kind of self-managed a bit. Yeah. The list of outcomes that you had on the board, I thought was really helpful. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering how you think that how you saw kids using that list.
Some kids already knew what to do. A lot of kids loved it because once I figured out like, oh, I should tell them what the list is. Like especially the kids that just need that extra support, could just look at it and like just check it off. Miss Diaz, I have this, and this done. I'm here now. So it's common language. We can point at it, know where we're at, especially with everyone being everywhere. Mm-hmm. We can be all on the same page of like where you're at. So I feel like that was really helpful. And I think by that point, by the time you came in, like we were in it, and kids, we produced enough things so a partner, like they would have to split up the work. There was enough things to do. So like they had, they couldn't just be, most of them, that's the goal.
How did you set them up? Like talk me through how you set up that work time. Like right before I entered the space, like what was that conversation like?
So for your day, what was it? Was it Wednesday?
It was the Wednesday.
Okay, so because we were going to be grading soon, we started to do now with I gave them the rubric. I had them self-grade. Okay. Because I think some kids were doing the right thing. Some kids were getting kind of distracted. So I wanted to give them the rubric. On the backside were a couple of reflection questions. And I was like, this is literally how I'm going to grade you. Okay. I'm going to ask you to grade yourself right now based on how you've been doing. Mm-hmm. So kind of just the self-monitoring, like, just right here. Some of them grading it. Some of them understood, like, I had already write the rubrics in the packet. But, doesn't mean they actually read it. We ended up, once again, time constraints, everything constraints. We just focused on 3 standards. Okay. And then 2 math anchors. Yeah. And it's been there the whole time. And we went over it when the project started, but, processing doesn't always happen. So then literally, here's the rubric. We actually had them do these questions.
How often did you use this rubric, like in conversations, like checking in?
Not often enough. Honestly, not. It was mostly
awesome if you would have I can imagine you going up to a group, checking in and saying let's see, based on what you've done so far, where we would land on this, so that this rubric becomes that much more real.
No, that could have been definitely something to do. I feel like it was more informal conversations. Like, this is what you've been doing, this is what I need you to do. Yeah. But I could have definitely been more specific in terms of you're right here right now. You could be over there.
How did they do in terms of self-management?
I mean, it depends on the class, right? Second block is usually pretty good. Mm-hmm. I had my antsy boys, which they were, once they knew they had enough to do, they were fine. Honestly, that's not usually an issue. There's usually just a handful of kids who struggle with unstructured time. Yeah. This is there's always the same 2 or 3 who I know I have to be on, because unstructured time gets them.
And what does that on look like for them?
For them?
Yeah. What is you being on them?
I mean, it's Manny, what are you doing? What should you be doing? Uh-huh. And he'll be oh, okay. And so if it happens too much, seconds. And then it's also okay, you're gonna have to work near me. Yeah. So that you can just, sometimes they're just insecure about what they have to do. So I'm here to answer your questions. Yeah. Other than that, partnerships were pretty solid. So someone was holding it down most of the time.
Nice. Yeah. I think one of the things that that I did notice was that you were that accountability person for a lot of those kids, and I'm wondering then if we're talking about self-management and then even partnership, how we could make those partnerships that much stronger where they are also doing that accountability work for each other. Yeah. Because there was I forgot who was sitting here. It wasn't Matthew's group. It was the other
Diego Solano.
Yeah. So he went up to Diego and was like, "This is all you did? We've been sitting here for 20 minutes." And like that was a moment where I was like, there's accountability there, but he didn't like how can we push that further where it isn't just like, what the hell, man? But like rather, let's make a plan of action. Like let's check off like at these intervals, like, and I felt like that's where I saw like using that projection would have been really helpful if they even like, I can imagine something like students putting exactly where they were in the process, like with sticky notes up on the wall, or you having some sort of checklist that they are then making on their own, or like having the groups like make their own goals for the day, and so that way when you checked in with them, it wasn't about like the things that you do exactly for those individual students. I felt like it would have been awesome to see you do them for